Good day, everybody, and thank you for joining this panel discussion. It's a pleasure to be part of NAILBA 39, the Engage meeting, the most interesting meeting perhaps we've seen NAILBA host in its history in the 39th year of this annual meeting. So many of us attended over the years. It's a real pleasure to be part of today's session, a very important discussion, one that I think you're going to find very informative. We have an excellent panel who is going to tackle the topic of diversity and inclusion in the insurance profession. And what is the insurance industry doing to reflect the makeup and the composition of our ever-evolving country and industry? We have three excellent panelists with us today that I'm going to invite to introduce themselves to you. I'll start by introducing myself. I'm Chris Orestis, and I'm the president of the Life Care Settlement Exchange. I've been an industry veteran for over 20 years. I've been working with and part of NAILBA for a number of years. In fact, last year I was one of the ID20 recipients, a real honor in my career. And it's just been an absolute pleasure to be working with NAILBA and all the members for all these years. And I'm excited to be able to be part of this panel. I'd like to invite our panelists to introduce themselves, give a little bit of background, and then we'll open up the panel discussion to our round of topics. Jennifer, why don't you introduce yourself first?
Hi, everyone. My name is Jennifer Ortale, and I am the National Vice President of Sales for Executive Benefits at Securian Financial Group. Securian Financial Group is located in St. Paul, Minnesota, and I've been with the company 4 years. My experience in financial services has been 25 plus years. I've seen a lot of really positive changes in the last 25 years with respect to diversity and inclusion. There's more women in our business than ever before, which is very exciting to me. But there's other things about diversity and inclusion that I'm really excited to talk to you about today. Our company is very committed to creating a culture of inclusiveness. And as such, I've had the honor of being part of an associate resource group, leading discussions on the book Women Rise. We've had the opportunity to meet in small groups over the last year to discuss things from the book that are very meaningful for diversity and inclusion in personal lives and professional lives. So I'm very happy to be part of this panel discussion today, and I look forward to seeing you all soon.
Jennifer, thank you. Martina?
Thank you, Chris, and thank you, NAILBA, for the opportunity for me to join this conversation today. I'm Martina Winston, Vice President, Senior HR Partner and Diversity and Inclusion Leader for the organization. As I believe you all know, Protective Life is a life and annuity and asset protection organization that's been around for 113 years, and really excited to be here. Protective went on a journey about 3 years ago to renew our focus around diversity and inclusion, and it's great to be able to share and learn from conversations like this. I've been in the insurance industry for about 7 years, but I do have some experience in the financial industry. And I provide HR partner support to our protection division, our actuarial organization, and also our investment team, and then also lead the organization around diversity and inclusion. And I work with our global parent, Dai-ichi Life, that's based in Tokyo, Japan, and lead our global talent efforts. But again, thank you. Looking forward to the conversation and learnings today.
Thank you. And our final panelist.
Hi, I'm Brandy Smith. I am with Lincoln Financial Group. I am the Vice President of Workplace Diversity and Counsel. What that means is that I'm an attorney by trade and an HR professional by passion. Prior to my current role, I was the Chief Compliance Officer and Counsel of our Group Benefits Division. And I've been plugged in with D&I since being with Lincoln 8 years ago is when I joined. Our company is doing great things around diversity and inclusion. I'm excited to share our perspective and hear from other companies as well. And I have to mention that I have a 6-year-old boy named Nikos, and I have a 1.5-year-old little girl named Rosie. I think that's like a parent rule that you have to mention your children when you speak at events.
And I'm glad you followed that rule. So as you can see, everybody, we couldn't have a better panel to discuss diversity inclusion in the workforce and in our insurance industry profession. I think over the next 45 minutes, you're going to find a very, very robust discussion, and you're going to have a chance to walk away with some real insight, and I hope some tools you'll be able to take away back to your own companies and look around and ask yourself, are you doing the right things and similar things? Is there things you're hearing here that might work to broaden the base of your own company? So what I want to do is open up the discussion with a first question. I think it's appropriate for each of you to address. We're going to try and keep the discussion to within about a 45-minute window. So let's do our best to be time cognizant as each of you contribute your insight to these questions. Let me start with the first one. And Brandy, I'll ask you to take it on first, and we'll go from there. How has the pandemic and the pivot to remote working impacted inclusion and diversity priorities within your organization?
Sure, that's a heavy question, right? When you take the pandemic and you load diversity and inclusion on top of it, there's a lot that can be said. But there's a lot that can be said because there's a lot that has happened and a lot that we're all going through. When I think about the pandemic itself, I immediately think about my company and starting to work from home last March. The company shut down very quickly, sent everyone home. And at that point, we shifted focus. Everyone's lives shifted as we adjusted to this virtual world, right? But as things went on and moved and developed, one of the things that we had to stop and think about were these, how are we continuing to connect with our employees while they're at home? How are we continuing to engage with the employees while they are at home? And to add diversity and inclusion on top of that, studies show that people of color, people who are diverse in addition to color, they thrive in the workplace. In the workplace, being able to interact and to have relationships. And so one of the things that we did was we had very targeted and specific reach outs. So people were reaching out to their employees in ways that they hadn't before, necessarily directly, just in passing. You have conversations maybe with your one level boss up or two level bosses up. But we really said, how do we continue to engage? And we, leaders and managers across the organizations, targeted people to reach out to and to continue conversations. But when we started to think about the volunteer groups and the employees, how they see diversity and inclusion, we had to take a step back and say, do we ask these people who are volunteering their efforts, whether it's in an affinity group or just, some of our multicultural groups, to pause their efforts, or do we ask them to pivot and make it virtual? And at the time when we had the discussion, it was diversity and inclusion is just as important right now as it is any other day, whether we're in the office or out of the office. And we have an opportunity to continue to show that this is part of our culture. It is a core of who we are. So just as every other business function is continuing to move, D&I needs to move as well. We started to see how the pandemic was impacting some of the Black and Brown communities at a higher rate than other communities, impacting everyone, right? But impacting as far as bringing to light some disparities around how people are getting healthcare and how our families are impacted. And so when we thought about really the two connected, the pandemic and being virtual and working from home, we realized that our employees are not able to separate their day life from their night life or their home life from their work life. So we had to be very intentional of providing support and guidance and answering questions. We brought in an external doctor to some of our business resource groups to really be able to provide questions and guidance. And then the piece that was really, I think, eye-opening and thinking about how the pandemic and D&I efforts are intertwining is, after the death of George Floyd and the fact that because of the pandemic, everyone's lives were at a standstill. Everyone had the time to stop and to watch and to see what was happening unplay and unfold before their eyes, in a way that maybe things were in a hustle and bustle and you didn't do before. George Floyd was not the first person that we've witnessed to, die on camera, to lose his life, to be impacted in that way. But the fact that we couldn't separate home from work, we couldn't separate virtual from reality, it's all combined, and people were losing their lives on top of that with a pandemic. Goodness.
Mhm.
Right. So we had to really pivot and think about, how do we continue to support? How do we get people the EAP services and the support they need as we move throughout this?
Brandy, thank you. That obviously you've taken it on and taken it on very seriously. Jennifer, how about you? How have you seen the pandemic and this pivot to working from home impact your efforts?
Well, in March, we sent 95% of our employees home to continue the good work through all of the divisions at Securian Financial. And as Brandy said, there's been so much for employees and employers to address and manage and support this year, from the pandemic to what happened with George Floyd, to the inequities that exist, in our communities. So I'll touch on just a couple of things that we focused on. We've always taken great pride in offering a very robust summer internship program.
Mm.
And despite all of the odds that were stacked against us in 2020, we were able to host that summer internship program to 41 interns with a meaningful work experience, despite the fact that it was remote. And the reason that I mentioned that summer internship program, it's a program that has an emphasis on attracting diverse talents. And so it's at the core of our company's values of embracing diversity and inclusion. And it is a shining light of talent that we can bring in and introduce to financial services. So we were able to keep that program intact, and it went very well. We will continue to offer our summer internship program this year. We expect that 2021 summer will still be remote, and we want to keep working on attracting those diverse talents from diverse populations through our summer internship program. So we're really proud of that. We're very happy that we were still able to offer that to our interns. The second thing has been a wonderful development for our company as far as attracting and retaining talent. Historically, we have had our geographic pool of talent really close to our headquarters in St. Paul. And the silver lining of the pandemic has allowed us to offer and expand a really hybrid approach to how we work. We can be more nimble, we're resilient, and we're increasing our geographic reach. So we are actually able to engage with a broader and diverse population around the metro and suburban areas of Minneapolis and St. Paul, but even expanding across the country. So we're very intentional about attracting, that highly talented and diverse population. And we're able to do that now more than ever. So we're very pleased with that. As I already referenced it, it's a silver lining for us in the pandemic. We know that there is a lot of juggling that goes on in our employees with families and work. And we, like many other companies, have rolled out and offered a very generous pandemic benefit to support our employees as they're juggling responsibilities, but also facing, potential issues with COVID itself. So I personally, as an employee and somebody who values flexibility, diversity, and the benefits that support those things, have seen just wonderful experiences this year, despite all the challenges. So very pleased with what Securian's done and what we've been able to do with our employees and the support.
Well, Jennifer, you make a great point about finding silver linings in the situation. Adaptation and finding those silver linings is really the key in anything that gets served to us. If we can find the positive, I think that's the way to go for everybody. Martina, how about you? How have you handled the pivot?
Yeah, thank you, Chris. And very similar to Brandy and Jennifer, Protective's approach was spot on. When we deployed our employees home to ensure the health and safety of not only themselves, but also their families, I really saw a Herculean effort, not only from our leaders, but also from our employees, for them to really not only think about, okay, now I've got to go home. I've got to focus on health, safety, well-being. I've got to keep everybody that I love around me safe and secure. I've also got to think about the people that I love in my work family. I'm thinking about those folks, and I'm also continuing to deliver on our ultimate promise, which is to help our customers and help our, the folks that we serve every day. And it was a very difficult time for all of our employees, whether if you were a leader at the top of the house or someone deeper in the organization. I just really commend our employees for continuing to do what we needed them to do to help with the business, and then also continue to think about themselves. But I do believe that in order for our employees to do that, we had to provide some really good foundation and support. Chris, I got to tell you, this is actually my favorite question that I get asked about the pandemic and how did organizations shift, particularly at Protective, because I see this opportunity. I call it the gift of COVID. I know we have not received a lot of, positive things during COVID. We've all lost a lot of loved ones. We've seen a lot of sickness, a lot of really disparities within our country and within our communities. But the one gift that COVID gave us, when I think about inclusion, this is the best example of inclusion that I have ever seen. When we've had leaders really have to stop and think about their employees differently. And I'm not talking about just walking down the hall and saying, hey, Bob, how are you doing? You have a good weekend, and you move on about your day. Our leaders and employees, they had to be intentional about scheduling a Teams meeting, making sure the time was right and you're in the right time zone. And then before just diving into business, we had to stop and say, how are you doing? Are you okay? How's your family doing? What did you all do over the weekend? Did you get a chance to get some fresh air? Is everything up? I understand you had COVID last week. How are you doing, and how are you recovering? In full transparency, our leaders just weren't wired that way. I'm not saying that we weren't, thinking about our employees and asking those questions, but the shift and the pivot to really focus on our employees and themselves, best example of inclusion I've ever seen. And really the shift that our employees overall, had to make was just so impactful. And again, very similar to Jennifer and Brandy, some of our, health and wellness resources, ensuring that our employees had those very quick at their fingertips. We also had to shift our communication efforts to make sure that our leaders were prepared to be able to have those conversations, because in some instances, they were also dealing with those things on their own. So not only do they have to get up every day and figure out, okay, how do I do this again? They also had to think about themselves. It was really important to ensure that we had really strong communications at all levels of the organization. And we also opened up, which this is one of my favorite things that we do, on Fridays, we have a grab your coffee 30-minute chat. All of our employees are invited across the organization, and we've had, different topics of conversation around, how are you dealing with now homeschooling your children, which, by the way, I have two, and I completely forgot to mention them because they're teenagers and they don't ever want me to mention them with anything. It was really good opportunity for our employees to be vulnerable. And really to help us understand what's on their mind, what are they thinking about, and that really gave us a to-do list as an organization to say, hey, we need to stop and focus on this, and we need to provide resources on this. So again, a great effort by all of our employees at Protective, and I'm sure really by employees across the nation. I mean, we've seen our country really come together in a time where we haven't experienced, I know, in my lifetime.
Well, I think what should be quite obvious to everybody who's joining us for this session is the positive energy and the positive attitude that you have all brought to this, and the creative approach that your companies have taken to not fall back at all, but actually propel forward in your diversity and inclusion initiatives. And Martina, you brought up a good point about, you know, the culture of a company and the leaders of the company, which leads us to our next question. Brandy, how important is it for leaders to show up as allies in this process, and what are some strategies they can implement to be effective to take on diversity and inclusion from the top down?
Just to answer the question directly first, leaders are very important. They are the most important in understanding and driving diversity and inclusion. And I know sometimes we are cautious around that top down, mentality when it comes to the corporate approach. But at the end of the day, the leaders drive the strategy. They drive, ultimately how we build that culture. And if your CEO and their reports are not saying that diversity and inclusion should be at the top of the list, that it's core and foundational, then why would anyone else pick it up and run with it? Right? As you look down the path, and of course, there are people who are already passionate about it. There are people who care. But you can't make a big impact inside your company and in the community if your leaders are not involved, engaged, and believe in the importance of it. And not just as stats have shown that diversity and inclusion is important to the bottom line, the dollar. It's really about caring about your employee population. It's really about the employee population seeing that leader and seeing that the leader cares beyond just what they could benefit from it, but about the people who work there, about the community. So leaders are so important. They have to use that platform to move the needle from diversity and inclusion perspective in order for people to understand that it's important in the core. I also know that some of the things that you experience is that across the nation, across, everyone that we interact with, and even within the workforce, there may be people who don't understand the importance of diversity and inclusion. There may be people who are still learning, right? But when you have a leader say that, add this to your list because it's important, and to provide education around it and to provide support, it's so necessary.
And Martina, you had brought up already some of your thoughts on leadership. So I'm going to ask Jennifer if to chime in at all on any leadership top-down embrace in your company.
Absolutely. It is such a pleasure to be with others discussing this and thinking about what my own employer, Securian Financial, is doing, and hearing some of the same things being echoed elsewhere. It gives me hope, and it inspires me that companies and leaders are really, really embracing diversity and inclusion. And I would like to say finally, but I think that finally that is happening. And in my personal opinion, it comes from the top down, and I'm seeing that from a leadership perspective in our company, from a board perspective, from middle management, from all management within Securian Financial. We're embracing, looking at things differently. Allies are paying attention. They're speaking up. They're advocating for others. They're encouraging voices that have not been heard as much as they should have in the past. Our leaders are doing things in the moment to course correct if somebody is interrupted or not acknowledged. But a formal program of diversity and inclusion and training and exposure to books that are being read, that's something that we've been done formally. So we have book clubs within Securian that have read books such as Women Rise, such as So You Want to Talk About Race. And we have formalized the support for associate resource groups to have a forum to read and tackle and discuss and plan and heal all through the lens of diversity and inclusion. And it's very meaningful. I'm seeing a shift out in the bigger world and in my company, you know, as we embrace those real things. And as we change, we're changing our hiring practices. We're changing meeting structures. We're changing retreats, the reward system, the spouse outings that we have, the trips. So I think just examining everything around us and saying, you know, we have to change, we have to embrace, we have to include. It's something I see every day, and it's coming from the top. So in my opinion, it can't be an optional thing. It has to be a required learning, a required building of the culture. And I'm seeing that happily.
Yes, for it to be real and for it to be effective, it's got to be much more than just a press release. It really has to become part of the corporate culture. And for anything to become part of the corporate culture, if the leadership doesn't embrace it, it's not going to happen. Martina, let me ask you, the definition of diversity centers around race and gender. What are some of your thoughts on expanding that definition and bringing it more into the business and in our personal lives, the cross section of business and personal?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, I think a lot of different people as individuals have their own definition of what diversity means to them. You know, I can tell you when we started our renewed focus around diversity and inclusion at Protective, it was very important for us to define what does diversity and what does inclusion mean for us. That was really important. And we really wanted to take the approach of really leveraging diversity to really value all difference. We recognize that everyone comes to the table with something different that we can leverage and embrace and value. And we really saw that as important. And when I think about piggybacking a little bit on the conversation around leadership, you know, we were really intentional about providing opportunities for our leaders to become comfortable with being uncomfortable. And especially in 2020, again, I don't know if we could have, you know, set that situation up any better than actually what happened. But we were on a journey prior to the couple of pandemics that we experienced in 2020 to prepare training all of our people leaders, you know, around inclusive leadership. We've really been focused around developing that, you know, as a capability. And I can say that we trained 99% of our people leaders, 610 from July to December. And it wasn't about, let me give you a checklist and tell you all the things. If you do point A to Z, then you will be an inclusive leader. That was not our approach at all. We really wanted our leaders to come to the table to be vulnerable. And we wanted them to say, I don't know. I'm aware, like I know that I should have some awareness around this, but I don't know how to really be an advocate. I really don't know what types of actions I should take. And we had never done anything like this before. I mean, it was unheard of because, of course, as a leader, right, you don't want your people to see you sweat. You want to have all the answers and you want to, but this was really a pivot for us. And Chris, I think the reason why I bring that up around the how do you take this out of kind of your personal everyday into your, you know, professional or vice versa, because what we saw as we started to build that inclusive capability is that our leaders were going home and sharing their experience through that inclusive leadership training with their families and their significant others and their children and their neighbors to say, hey, I'm trying to understand a little bit better or help me understand, or in even some cases to say, I don't know. And we created tons of resources, very similar to Jennifer, whether if it was articles or books or podcasts or TED Talks, or really allowing our leaders to open up those conversations within their employee populations. And again, our whole premise around that fact was we want you to be comfortable with being uncomfortable, and it's okay saying that you don't know. And so I think that that's been really great learning and growth. And we're also seeing that shift in movement as leaders and even as our employees as well. I mean, there's just a lot to unpack. And, you know, I can think of, especially around the summertime, it was heavy. I seriously think I probably cried that first week, after the George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, and Breonna Taylor scenario, very heavy. I was working on a lot of messaging within our, organization. Tons of questions were asked. And I remember telling somebody when they were like, Martina, what do we do? I said, I'm almost 40 years old. I'm an African-American Black woman. I don't know the answers to, if I knew, then we wouldn't be in this, we wouldn't be in this scenario. And I remember crying on 4 different occasions in different meetings, just because it was just so heavy. And going back to Brandy, I think you mentioned it was hard for our employees to separate work from home and home from work and virtual from reality. I mean, it was all reality, all hitting us in our face, and we honestly could not run away from it.
Martina, thank you. And thank you for sharing that personal element of it. It for all of us was very, very impactful and has been ever since. This is, it's been a tumultuous time, but again, all of your efforts to find the positive are coming across very clear, and I think will be great examples to those others in the industry. So thank you for that definition of diversity and more of what you're doing to expand it. Brandy, let me ask you, in the initiatives of diversity and inclusion, Martina did a wonderful job defining for us the diversity half, but for you, what do you say about the definition of what inclusion means and how to implement that in real terms beyond just giving it lip service?
Yeah, I think inclusion requires us to stop and think. So everyone listening, just stop and remove diversity from it. Think about a time where you have been the person to tell a joke and no one laughs because no one gets it. Think about a time where you have been the only woman, somewhere, or the only person to have a certain opinion in a room. And think about how you felt. I mean, even a simple example, have you ever shown up to an event where you were either overdressed or underdressed, right? Something that you can think about very simply. And how did you feel? When you walked in that room, did you, oh my goodness, I'm overdressed, I'm underdressed, right? And then adding diversity into it, okay, we have a variety of people. That's when you start to look around and go, well, she has on a gown, kind of, right? Or, oh, that person over there has sparkly shoes on too, right? So you start to look for those things that okay, there is diversity in this room. Everyone's not, dressed a lot differently than me. And then think about whether or not that person who is over or underdressed sits in that chair at that table and doesn't want to get up, whether or not someone speaks on, oh, I see you didn't get the memo on the dress code, right? And how that may make you feel. You may laugh, but you may go, thanks for pointing it out, right? And then think about, as that event goes on, whether or not you're like, let me get out of here as soon as I can. As soon as the first person gets up to walk through the door, I'm right behind them where no one will notice. Or does that person get to the level where they're like, I'm cool here? The conversation's been great. No one really called me out on the fact that I'm over or underdressed. And I feel like I can stay because I'm enjoying my time. That, to me, is inclusion. When you get that person to stay, and that's where you tie that belonging to that inclusion. Regardless of how they've shown up, regardless of how they personally felt when they showed up, do they feel like, regardless of their external piece, regardless of how they've made themselves up, how they are made up as a person, do I feel like people care about me enough for me to stay and to enjoy what I'm going through? So that's how I view inclusion. Sometimes you have to stop and make it as simple as possible to take away the diversity piece and think about a time where you did not feel included and why you felt that way and how you got to the point where you did feel included.
Martina, any additional thoughts on the taking action around inclusion and making it real?
Yeah, Brandy, I love that example. I'm sitting here thinking about several, times for myself. And, I think the inclusion piece is something that you've got to work hard at. Like it's not a one and done. It's not a check the box. It's one that you got to do over and over and over again. And you got to be intentional about it too. I think that that's the other beauty about this work, is that it's very easy to call someone, kind of call them to the carpet when they're not being genuine, in that inclusive space. Also when I think about inclusion, I also think about just the beauty of being able to welcome and value all of those differences and embrace. And I know we talked a little bit about kind of that bottom line and that business value. That's where you get innovation and creativity. That's when you really start getting everybody rolling on all cylinders, when they feel like they are valued, and when they feel like their voice is heard at the table. And then they start to bring, to the table a different level of energy. I was actually talking to an employee a couple of days ago, and, this was really beautiful. She was telling me that I was actually watching her in a presentation, and I was like, wow, you just shined in that presentation. And I just want to thank you for really bringing your full self into that presentation. She said, you know what, Martina, I'm a part of a different group right now. And I feel like they want me there. Not the employee that can do all the stuff, but they want my heart, my mind, my body. They want all of me. And now I'm able to show up. And I was like, she was smiling and energetic and just full of energy. And I said, I want to see more of that every single day. The last thing that I'll include, and I think those are the beautiful things that employees are looking for. I was able to share that message with the manager to say, thank you for creating an environment that is welcoming for employees to be able to show up, and particularly this employee to show up and to feel like she is wanted and wanting to be a part of the team. But we actually created last year, this was before the pandemic, pre-COVID, we actually created a series called My Stories for all of our employees to engage across the organization. And our theme around My Stories was to really create a space for all of our employees to see that we are more alike than we are different. And it's really cool because our employees are able to bring not only the professional side. So I'm Martina Winston, I'm an HR leader, I lead D&I, but let me tell you a little bit about who I am. What I'm passionate about, a little bit about my family, a little bit about my background and my experience. And it's been really cool because it comes out to all of our employees once a week, and other employees are reaching out. I actually got a note from our publication that launched on Wednesday for an employee. It was very much around faith, and another employee had reached out to them to say, thank you for feeling comfortable to share your love for God. And now I feel like I have someone that I can speak to and feel comfortable with in the organization. And by the way, this employee is all the way on the West Coast, and this other employee is in Birmingham, Alabama. And so making that connection, to me, that's another example of inclusion. And we're really excited. Sometimes you launch things and you're like, I don't know if this is going to work. But our My Story series was actually the top engaged intranet story for entire 2020 that our employees engaged in. So we see that as an effort around inclusion at Protective.
Thank you. And well defined and well explained to our listeners. So for this last question, I'm going to ask each of you to put on your consultant's hat. We have those that are joining us today on this session, and for some, they may not have a diversity and inclusion program. They might be thinking about it, or this may be the first time they're thinking about it. So if you were to sit down with them at the table and advise them on what are the programs and systems they could bring in to get started and to build a program, again, one that's just much more than a press release and a poster on the lunchroom wall, something that's real, something that has the leadership, something that will make a difference, and quite frankly, will groom and drive great employees and drive profitability for the companies. So, Jennifer, I'd like to start with you and with your consultant's hat on, and to those that are joining us today, how can they bring diversity and inclusion into their companies in a meaningful and successful way?
So I have such a different perspective than my colleagues here. I'm a sales leader, a strategist in the business units, and I have a team that I work with internally and external distribution professionals. So I always look at things through the lens of sales and strategy. And I personally just think that the training and education on these topics, like my colleagues probably think, they need to be mandatory. We must be talking about and training on and building on skills that inverse diversity and inclusion. We have to in everything we do in a company, through the sales process, through the hiring process, through the education process. And Securian Financial is supporting goals of diversity and inclusion that hits my day-to-day, my sales objectives and how I get there, my team and how I build it by attracting and developing diverse talent. That takes real intention. That takes accountability. We have to provide tools to our hiring managers within to minimize bias. We're doing that. We have to refresh our hiring practices. We're doing that. But it's really about being intentional throughout the full culture and every aspect that we touch on obtaining and retaining and developing talent in a diverse way. The second thing I believe that we have to keep doing, Securian is absolutely doing this through one of our 4 goals about diversity and inclusion, is fostering that inclusive culture and associate engagement. So our additional associate resource groups that we have rolled out this past year and some future ones that we will add are offering opportunities for our associates to have real conversations about these topics. And I personally lead one of the Women Rise groups, and I have benefited from it personally and professionally in ways that exceeded my expectations, and they were pretty high to begin with. I have grown, I have developed good relationships, I have groups from within that I trust and can run ideas and concerns by, and that was the point, to create that connectivity between people who might have not otherwise not been able to meet. So I've really enjoyed that inclusive culture development. We have to meet the needs of our customers, and this is through a sales lens. We have to innovate. We have to create new opportunities. We have to do things differently. We have to build our business story, and we need to do that. And we are doing that through diversity and inclusion. Our customers are as diverse as our employee base is. So we need to work differently that way. One of our big initiatives has been to involve our suppliers and our partners. So we're looking at all of the things that we do from those perspectives through the lens of diversity and inclusion. And our community impact, frankly, everything that I just said is really important, but how we're showing up in our community as a company has been very visible, very engaging. With the events that happened over Memorial Weekend with George Floyd, our leaders were very public in saying that we stand with other business leaders on police reform, on broader representation of our employees, of building awareness of all of the things that you need to do as a company and as a community to succeed. So I just think you have to commit from the top, again, back to that. It has to permeate through the culture.
Yep.
So I'm seeing that and living it every day, and I'm very grateful as a sales leader. So
this needs to be much more than a suggestion.
Absolutely.
Brandy, what advice can you give to your new clients that have joined us on today's session?
Sure, with the consultant hat on, talk to your employees. This is not a plug and play. You can't look and see what Lincoln is doing and thinking it's going to work for you. Each company has a different culture and a climate. Each business unit, each team has a different culture and climate. One of the things we did was start conversations. We called them crucial conversations. It goes to what Martina said around having those discussions where sometimes they are uncomfortable. Sometimes tears are shed in an office place where you typically do not see tears shed, but those conversations have been eye-opening. Those conversations have been important into understanding maybe the gap in education around how do we continue to discuss and continue to provide resources for those people who want to be strong allies, and what they can do to help move the needle. So I ask that companies who haven't done anything or companies who are looking to go further, have conversations, ask your employees, and then you can build it into the core of who you are because it's coming from the inside of the company.
Thank you. And Martina, we're going to give you the final word on the subject and in today's discussion overall.
Thank you. Jennifer, Brandy, I agree with you 100%. There's a lot of different things, to unpack there. But with my consultant hat on, I would say get really crisp and clear on what it is that you are trying to do in that moment. One of the things and kind of common failures that I think the business world has seen over the years, which is why we're still trying to solve this thing around diversity and inclusion, is a lot of companies have tried to do it all. And I think that going into with a very clear mind of this is what we are trying to accomplish and make sure everyone is on board and aligned with that mission and that strategy, and keep everyone like just zeroed in and focused on we are going to do this. We're going to get really well at this. We're going to create some good foundation before just jumping on to the next thing and jumping on to the next thing. I think that that's where employees really start to call a little bit of the organization's bluff. And to your point, Chris, not just putting something, in the cafeteria to say, okay, now we're all inclusive and we're going to welcome, diverse perspectives and diverse people. No, we want to be really move from that conversation into action. Here's how we're going to do it. Here are our results. Here's where we were successful and here's where we failed. That's the other thing I would suggest to share as well. When you tackle something and present something that you thought was going to be the golden ticket, but then you found out that, oh, well, that's not working. Let your employees know, be vulnerable. That's what our employees are looking for. They're looking for that vulnerability. They're looking for that space. It kind of goes back to that being comfortable with being uncomfortable is something that I would definitely suggest. And for protective, I can tell you that the thing that really helped move the needle for us to not only share our commitment, but also hold some accountability. In June 2019, our CEO signed the CEO Action for Diversity and Inclusion Pledge. And it was really important not only for Rich Beelan to put his signature on the dotted line, but to really take the things that pledge held us accountable to, and we're continuing to call out. The CEO Action Pledge said that we would, train our employees around unconscious bias and inclusion. We're doing that. And not just a one-stop shop, we're continuing to mature and iterate in that space. Also said that we would be, community stewards and sharing with our communities and our business partners around sharing best practices and the things that we're doing. We're doing that, especially within our, industry. We're saying that, we are not going to do this alone. We can't solve this alone. We're going to do this together, which is why forums like this is so important. So I'm really excited. That would definitely be a suggestion for those companies that have not made that commitment. Do it. And if you say you're going to do it, then you better deliver.
Well, absolutely. More than words, action. We need action. Well, that concludes then today's session, diversity and inclusion. What a fantastic discussion. What a great panel. Thank you so much for this opportunity for us to all be together today. Brandy, Jennifer, Martina, I want to thank each of you for sharing your insight, sharing your experience, sharing your passion for this very important topic. And I hope that our panelists, those who have joined the panel to listen to this discussion will be able to walk away with some information, some ideas that they can put in their toolbox, take back to their company, look at if they do have programs underway, can they do more? If you haven't started any kind of diversity and inclusion in your company, this is a great place to start thinking about how you move forward and do it. So thank you to NAILBA for the opportunity to have this panel discussion and have this topic covered by such experts. NAILBA 39 Engage. May you live in interesting times where we are all participating in pajama bottom conferences, and hopefully next year we'll be back together again in person, and maybe we can pick this discussion up again a year later and see how things are looking as everybody moves forward. So thank you all so very much. Thank you to NAILBA, and thank you to all of you who have joined and listened on this session today.